The radio crackled once and went dead. I slapped the side of the unit, more out of habit than hope, but all I got was static, low, broken, and oddly wet, like someone whispering underwater. It was supposed to be routine. A week-long rotation at the remote checkpoint north of Gray Pines, the kind of assignment rangers like me got stuck with when the bosses wanted you out of the way. Usually, you'd have a handful of locals to check in on, a couple of hunters lost in the woods, maybe a bear sighting. But not this. The village was called Marrow's End, though no map I'd ever seen bothered to name it. Just a scatter of wooden houses clinging to the mountainside, smoke usually curling from their chimneys like lazy ghosts. But when I rounded the bend and the checkpoint came into view, I felt my chest tighten. No smoke, no sound, not a single person in sight. I parked the truck, killed the engine, and listened. Silence. The kind that presses on your eardrums until you start hearing your own heartbeat. Even the forest felt wrong. No birds, no rustling, just stillness. The houses were open, doors hanging loose. I walked into the first one I saw, and the smell hit me. Cooked meat, still fresh, gone cold. On the table, a plate sat with a half-cut piece of venison, knife and fork resting mid-bite as though someone had just stepped away. The fire in the hearth still smoldered. "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the stale air. No answer. I checked another house. Same thing. Meals abandoned, beds unmade, a baby's rattle on the floor. It was like the whole village had risen in the middle of dinner and walked out into the woods, never to return. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying something faint, a metallic tang, sharp, like iron shavings. I followed it to the edge of the square where the dirt road began its slow crawl into the forest. That's when I saw them. Footprints, dozens, maybe, hundreds, pressed into the soil, all leading the same way. Bare feet, some small as children's, others deep and wide. They trailed off into the trees, and then stopped. No scatter, no return. Just vanished, as though the forest had swallowed them whole. I knelt, touched the dirt. The ground was cold, damp, but the prints were sharp, fresh, within the last day. My radio hissed again. This time, through the static, I thought I heard a voice, thin, broken, almost pleading. "Don't look." The words were gone before I could be sure I'd heard them. I stood in the middle of that abandoned village, my own breath fogging in the cold air, and felt the weight of something unseen pressing against me. I wasn't just looking at emptiness. I was standing in the middle of a mystery, one that reeked of something ancient, something wrong. And I had the sinking feeling Marrow's End hadn't simply vanished. It had been taken. The first house hadn't shaken me enough. I told myself there had to be an explanation, an evacuation order, a sudden storm warning, maybe even a fire drill gone wrong. People don't just vanish. But the deeper I went into Marrow's End, the less convincing those lies became. I pushed into a 2-story home near the village square, the kind that looked sturdier than the rest. Its front door creaked wide, hinges groaning like a warning. Inside, the air was warmer, staler. The scent of burnt wood lingered, and beneath it, something sour. The living room looked lived in. Boots still muddy sat by the hearth. A shawl was draped over the arm of a rocking chair. A mug of tea sat on the mantel, its liquid surface filmed over but not yet moldy. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry, but not long ago. Upstairs, I found the bedrooms. The first belonged to a child, maybe 7 or 8. Toys lined the shelves, wooden horses, carved soldiers. On the bed lay a patchwork quilt pulled halfway back, as if its owner had climbed out quickly. A stuffed bear sat against the pillow, its glass eyes catching the gray light bleeding through the curtains. In the master bedroom, things were worse. The sheets were twisted, blankets shoved aside. A wardrobe door swung gently as though nudged moments earlier, though no draft touched my skin. I stepped closer, only to find the wardrobe empty. Clothes torn from their hangers, nothing left but the faint smell of cedar. My pulse was racing now, but I forced myself into the kitchen. The table here had 3 plates, all half finished. One plate held boiled potatoes, another deer stew, another bread torn open mid-bite. A single chair was knocked over, its legs jutting upward like a dead animal's stiffened limbs. Something about that overturned chair chilled me more than the footprints outside. It wasn't abandonment, it was interruption. I tried the tech door. It was locked from the inside. Whoever had left hadn't gone this way. The silence pressed harder. I thought of turning back, returning to my truck, but a nagging sense, half duty, half dread, pulled me forward. If the villagers had gone into the forest, why had no one radioed for help? And what about the static voice whispering, "Don't look"? I checked another house, then another. Each told the same story. Tables set for meals that no one finished. Fires left to smolder. Tools abandoned mid-task. One home had a loom with half-woven cloth still taut, the shuttle hanging suspended in the air as if the weaver had simply evaporated. By the fourth house, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just strange, it was wrong, profoundly wrong. Places don't hold memories like this unless something violent rips people from them. And yet, there were no signs of violence. No broken windows, no blood, no overturned furniture. Just absence. I stepped outside into the square again. The sky above was bruising with evening, clouds heavy and low. I smelled that metallic tang once more, sharp and bitter, and found myself swallowing against the taste of iron in my throat. Behind me, a door slammed shut. I spun. Every house stood still, silent, doors ajar exactly as I'd left them. My skin prickled. I hadn't imagined it. Something had moved, and I wasn't alone. The slam echoed through me long after the silence returned. My hand hovered over the holster at my hip. Though drawing my pistol felt pointless, a gun couldn't shoot what I couldn't see. I forced myself to keep moving, circling back toward the village square. The footprints I'd noticed earlier still trailed into the woods, dozens of them pressed deep into the soft soil. I crouched low, brushing my fingers across the indentations. They hadn't been here long. The edges were sharp, the ground still damp, not yet smoothed by weather. Some prints were small, children's feet. Others were larger, wider, heavier. One in particular made me pause. It was enormous, twice the size of my own boot, sunk deeper than it should have been, as though whatever made it weighed far more than a human body. The trail led into the tree line, a jagged procession of bare feet shuffling into the darkness. My training told me to follow. My instincts screamed not to. I followed. The woods swallowed the village almost immediately. The air grew colder, thicker. No birds, no insects, not even the sigh of wind through branches. Just silence. I counted my steps, 10, 20, 30. The tracks grew fainter the farther I went until they stopped. I blinked, crouched low again, scanning the dirt. Nothing. One step they were there, sharp and clear, and the next the earth was smooth, untouched, as though the villagers had simply dissolved into thin air. I rose slowly, a hollow ache spreading in my gut. Behind me the forest groaned. Not wind, not an animal. Something deeper, like the earth itself shifting. I spun, flashlight cutting through the trees. Nothing, just trunks and shadow. I forced myself to breathe, to think. People don't just disappear. Maybe they'd split up, left the trail. I swept my beam across the trees, and that's when I saw it. High above, carved into the bark of a massive pine, was a symbol. A circle, jagged lines radiating outward like teeth, burned deep into the wood. The edges still smoldered faintly, as though freshly seared. My stomach twisted at the smell, charred wood mixed with something fouler, like burned hair. I stepped closer. The symbol was far too high for any villager to carve without a ladder. And the burn marks, they pulsed faintly, as if the tree itself were breathing. A sharp crack split the silence, branch snapping. My light swung left. For an instant, I thought I saw movement, something pale slipping between the trees. Thin, long, wrong. I shouted. My voice rang hollow. Nothing answered. By the time I turned back toward the ground, my stomach dropped. The footprints I had been kneeling beside were gone, smoothed away. The soil was untouched, unbroken, as though no one had ever walked there. My hand trembled on the flashlight. The forest held its breath, and I realized with a cold certainty I wasn't following the villagers' trail. Something was leading me deeper. By the time I stumbled back into the village, my nerves were raw. The woods clung to me, the silence still pressing against my skull. I needed noise, any noise, just to remind myself the world hadn't gone completely dead. I climbed into my truck and grabbed the radio mic. "Checkpoint to base, do you copy?" Static. I tried again, twisting the dial, punching the receiver, nothing but the hiss of dead air. Then, just as I was about to give up, something slithered through the noise, soft, broken, almost like a voice. Not safe, not safe. I froze, pressing the speaker close to my ear. Say again, identify yourself. The static shifted, a harsh burst of white noise. Then, behind you. My blood turned to ice. I spun in the seat, flashlight beams sweeping the empty square. Nothing. Doors yawning open, windows staring blank. The village was as still as it had been when I arrived. I shoved the mic down, heart hammering, and forced myself to breathe. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks. But then the smell returned, that metallic tang of iron, stronger now, stinging the back of my throat. I climbed out of the truck and followed it. The scent led me to the small guard shack at the far end of the checkpoint, a squat building with peeling paint and a single cracked window. I hadn't checked it before. The door hung slightly open. I pushed inside. The first thing I noticed was the radio console on the desk. Its lights glowed faintly, powered, but the wires trailing from its back were shredded, frayed as though chewed. The static filling the room was louder here, almost unbearable. A shrill whine threaded with whispers I couldn't quite catch. The second thing I noticed was the chair. It was toppled over, the floor around it gouged with deep scratches. 4 long lines, parallel, too even for claws, too wide for fingernails. Something had dragged across town. He would, digging in as though resisting. I crouched, running my fingers over the grooves. The wood was splintered, fresh. Behind me, the radio shrieked. Not static, screaming. A raw, ragged wail that filled the shack and rattled my bones. I slammed the power switch, but the console didn't shut off. The sound only grew louder, rising and falling like someone, or something, was trapped inside. I stumbled backward into the doorway, nearly tripping over the threshold. And then, just as suddenly, the screaming stopped. The shack was silent, dead. My ears rang in the absence, a hollow ache settling in my skull. I stared at the dark radio console, its lights still glowing faintly. The air in the room had changed, heavier, thicker, like something else was there with me, standing just out of sight. I left the shack and didn't look back. But as I crossed the square again, I heard the radio click on by itself. Its broken voice carried faintly through the night. Don't look. By the time night bled fully into Marrow's End, the square looked like a stage abandoned mid-performance. Lamps still hung on poles, but their glass was cracked, bulbs long dead. The houses crouched in silence, their windows black and waiting. I told myself I'd check one last place before retreating to the truck for the night. The largest home, sitting at the far end of the square. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was heavier, tinged with rot. My flashlight beam caught the edges of photographs lining the walls. Stern-faced men, children in stiff clothing, women clutching baskets of bread. Old pictures, but all with the same backdrop, the forest looming close behind them. In every single photograph, the trees looked darker than they should, shadows pooled too deep, as if something stood among them just out of focus. I moved into the sitting room. A blanket was folded on a rocking chair. Beside it, stacked neatly on a low table, was a pile of journals bound in cracked leather. My fingers itched to leave them alone, but duty outweighed fear. I sat and opened the first. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible at times. The entries stretched back decades. The writer identified herself only as Mara, an old woman, by the sound of her voice on paper. The earliest entries were mundane, weather notes, crop troubles, squabbles between families. But as I turned the pages, the tone shifted. The fog came again tonight. It rolls from the woods, thick as wool. We do not go outside when it comes. Another entry, weeks later. The children speak of a bell they hear in their dreams. They say someone calls them into the trees. We lock our doors tighter. The words clawed at me as I read. Mara wrote of villagers vanishing one by one, always at night, always without a sound. Families would sit to supper, and when the candles guttered, someone would be gone. Then Cam, and the line that made my throat go dry. I am the last to remain awake. I hear them scratching at my door, whispering through the cracks. They say my name. They tell me to look. I will not. I will never look. The entry ended there. No date, no signature, just silence. I flipped further ahead. but the remaining pages were blank. The house groaned in the stillness, wood shifting under unseen weight. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. That was when I noticed the floor beneath the table. Faint scratches marred the wood, dozens of them, shallow lines etched by desperate fingers. My pulse pounded. Mara hadn't just written about locking herself in. She had been here, trapped, resisting whatever came for her. The scratches were proof of her final struggle. I shut the journal and backed toward the door. As I did, the rocking chair creaked, once, twice, slowly, deliberately. The air smelled of iron again. I didn't wait to see if the chair would move further. I fled into the cold night, clutching Mara's journal tight, the words etched into my skull. They tell me to look. I will not. I tried sleeping in the truck, but sleep wouldn't come. The journal sat on the passenger seat, its cracked leather cover like an accusation. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Mara's words whispering through the back of my skull. They tell me to look. The village was silent, but not still. Wooden beams creaked as though shifting under unseen pressure. Shutters rattled, though no wind stirred. I sat in the cab with the dome light off, clutching my pistol in one hand, flashlight in the other, forcing myself to breathe slow and steady. Then I heard it. A sound so faint I thought it was just my pulse at first. A low, dragging scrape, like nails raking wood. It came from the far end of the square, where the old church hunched in the darkness. The noise stopped, then resumed. Long, slow, deliberate. I flicked on the flashlight and leaned out the window. Nothing moved. The beam cut across the abandoned homes, over broken fences, across doorways left ajar. Nothing. But then came the whisper. It wasn't words at first, just a hiss threaded through the night air. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. My name, spoken softly, drawn out, as if the speaker's tongue barely remembered how to shape it. Daniel. I froze. My radio sat silent on the seat. No transmissions. The whisper came from outside, curling through the square. Daniel, come look. Every hair on my arms rose. I shut the truck door quietly, refusing to answer, refusing to move. But the whispers grew stronger, multiplying. Voices layered on top of one another, some high and childish, others deep and broken, all of them tugging at my thoughts. The scraping sound came again, closer now. Something dragged across the cobblestones just beyond the truck's headlights. I forced myself to start the engine. The sound of the ignition roared too loud in the stillness, echoing off the buildings like a shot. Voices fell silent instantly. The scraping stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, from the edge of the headlights, something darted past. Pale, thin, impossibly fast. My heart slammed against my ribs. I threw the truck into gear and rolled it forward a few feet, headlights sweeping across the square. Empty. Nothing but shadows. Then came the laugh, high-pitched, giddy, echoing from the houses. A child's laugh, but wrong, drawn out, too sharp at the edges, as if something was imitating the sound rather than making it naturally. Another laugh answered from across the square. Then another, closer. The voices rose together, whispers and laughter weaving into one, circling me. My grip tightened on the wheel. I wanted to flee down the road, away from this place, but duty, or maybe morbid curiosity, held me rooted. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence crashed down again, heavy and suffocating. The journal lay on the seat, its cover trembling faintly against the vibrations of the truck. For the first time, I realized I was afraid to touch it again. I turned off the engine. The echo of that laughter still lingered in my skull, bouncing around like a trapped insect. And I knew, with sick certainty, that the night wasn't finished with me yet. I must have dozed off in the cab, though I don't remember closing my eyes. What woke me wasn't a sound, but the air itself. It pressed heavy against my chest, damp and cold, clinging to my skin. When I blinked awake, the windshield was white. A thick fog had swallowed the village. It pressed against the glass as though the truck were sinking underwater. I flicked the headlights on, but the beams bounced back, blinding me with a gray glow that illuminated nothing. The journal sat on the passenger seat, and for reasons I can't explain, I slid it under the floor mat as though hiding it might help. I cracked the window, and the smell hit me. Wet earth, iron, and something else underneath. Sweet, cloying, like rotting flowers. The fog wasn't just damp air. It carried a stench of decay. I stepped out of the cab, pistol drawn, flashlight cutting a narrow beam into the white wall surrounding me. The village was gone, erased. I couldn't even see the nearest house, though I knew it should have been just yards away. The fog muffled sound. My footsteps on the cobblestones felt too loud, but the echoes died immediately, as though swallowed whole. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was listening. Then I heard it. A bell. Low, distant, tolling once. The sound rippled through the fog like waves across water. My stomach turned cold. Mara's journal had mentioned the bell. The children had heard it in their dreams. I told myself it had to be the church. The old building sat at the far end of the square, but this bell didn't sound like it came from a tower. It came from everywhere at once, above me, beneath me, inside me. I moved toward it, step by step, guided more by instinct than sense. The fog shifted around me, curling and pulling. My light caught shapes sometimes, shadows just beyond reach, thin limbs, hunched backs, faces that dissolved when I turned the beam directly at two. And the bell tolled again, louder this time. My knees went weak. The sound wasn't just heard. It vibrated through my bones, made my teeth ache. "Daniel," the whisper came again, close to my ear. I spun, gun raised, light cutting through nothing, but the fog rippled where I turned, as though something had slipped just out of sight. The voices layered again, children laughing, a woman weeping, a man murmuring prayers in a language I didn't know, all at once, all around me. My flashlight sputtered, the beam flickered, then steadied. In that flicker, I saw them. Shapes standing in the fog, dozens of them, men, women, children, faces pale, eyes hollow, mouths moving soundlessly. The villagers of Marrow's End staring straight at me. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the light. When the beam steadied again, the figures were gone. Only fog remained, pressing closer, thickening until it burned my throat. The bell tolled a third time, and I realized, with sick certainty, that it wasn't calling the villagers, it was calling me. The fog didn't lift, it only shifted, hurting me like a sheepdog pushes strays. No matter which way I turned, the air pressed against me until my feet carried me toward the church at the edge of the square. Its black silhouette finally emerged from the gray, a hunched figure with a crooked steeple stabbing into the night. I stopped a few yards away, chest heaving. The church door was open, not ajar, wide, as if inviting me in. My light swept the threshold. Dust floated in the beam, disturbed recently. The bell tolled again. This time it was unmistakably from the steeple above, but I could see the bell rope through the doorway, hanging limp, unmoving. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and stepped inside. The air was colder here. The pews stretched in neat rows, but many were broken, splintered as if clawed at by wild animals. Hymn books lay scattered, their pages yellow and curling, some torn completely out. At the far end, the altar stood draped in a cloth blackened by mold. Candles lined the rail, melted down to puddles of wax. My light caught something carved into the altar itself, symbols like the one I'd seen burned into the pine tree. Circles, jagged teeth, curling lines that seemed to shift if I stared too long. Another toll shook the steeple above, rattling dust from the rafters. The sound hammered through my ribs, making my vision blur. I dropped to one knee, pressing a hand to the floor just to ground myself. The wood beneath my palm was scarred. Scratches again, dozens of them, etched deep, almost frantic. The whisper returned, curling from every corner of the church. "Daniel, look." I clenched my jaw. "No," I muttered, though the words sounded feeble in the hollow chamber. The pews groaned. Slowly, painfully, they shifted. My light swung across them and I nearly screamed. Figures sat there now, faint, translucent shapes, row after row of them. Men with hollow eyes, women clutching invisible infants, children with mouths hanging open in silence. They weren't solid, but they were watching me. Every head turned as one, faces fixed, mouths beginning to move. The bell tolled again, deafening, and their mouths widened into screams I couldn't hear but felt in my bones. I stumbled backward, pistol raised though it felt like a toy. My beam caught the steeple ladder in the corner. Without thinking, I bolted toward it. The climb was blind panic, rungs slick with something wet, sap or blood, I couldn't tell. My hand slipped, but I pulled myself upward until I emerged into the belfry. The bell loomed overhead, massive, green with age. It hung still, silent. Yet the tolling came again, shattering my ears. And then I saw it. Inside the bell, carved along its inner rim, were words. Not English, not any language I knew. The letters writhed, twisting like worms, glowing faintly in the dark. The toll rolled through me again. My vision swam. The fog outside the belfry pulsed like a living thing, pressing against the windows. For the first time since I arrived, I realized something with sick certainty. The villagers hadn't rung the bell. The bell had rung for them, and now it was ringing for me. I don't remember climbing down from the belfry. One moment I was staring into the glowing words etched inside the bell. The next, my boots struck the church floor hard enough to jolt me back to myself. The pews were empty again. The whispers had gone quiet. I stumbled out into the fog, chest heaving, hands slick with sweat. The night air didn't help. It felt thicker now, soupy and hot, as though the mist itself pressed against my lungs. That was when I saw him. A figure slumped against the wall of the nearest house, half hidden by the fog. At first, I thought it was another of the apparitions, one of the pale watchers that faded when my light touched them. But when I raised my flashlight, he squinted and threw an arm across his face, groaning, human, alive. I lowered the gun but kept the beam steady. "Hey!" My voice cracked against the fog. What happened here? Where is everyone?" The man shifted, revealing a gaunt frame draped in filthy clothes. His beard was matted, his eyes bloodshot. He looked more like a corpse that had forgotten to lie down than a living soul. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. His voice was raw, scraped thin by disuse. "Should have kept driving when the road went quiet." "I'm with the Rangers," I said, forcing authority into my tone. "Tell me what happened to the villagers." He laughed, or tried to. It came out like a cough. "Gone, taken, same as the rest, same as they always are." I took a step closer. The ground beneath him was damp, stained with dark patches I didn't want to identify. "What do you mean, always? Has this happened before?" His eyes snapped up to mine. There was madness there, yes, but something else. Something sharp, desperate. "Every few decades, the fog comes, the bell tolls, the earth remembers, and the people," he shook his head violently, "they answer." The air grew colder around us. The fog swirled, curling, grew like fingers along the ground. The man flinched, pressing himself harder against the wall. "You brought it with you," he whispered. "It knows your name now." My throat went dry. "Who knows my name?" He leaned forward, face inches from mine, breath foul. "The thing beneath the roots. The one they carved the runes for. The one they fed." The fog thickened, and somewhere beyond it came that scraping sound again. Long, slow, nails across stone. The man's eyes went wide with terror. "You need to leave, before it comes back." "Where?" "The road swallowed." He shook his head. "Not the road. The caves. Follow the riverbed. That's where they went." His hand clamped weakly onto my sleeve, nails digging into the fabric. "If you stay, you'll be nothing but another voice in the fog." The scraping sound grew louder, closer. The man shoved me hard toward the square, his face twisted in panic. "Run!" I stumbled back, light flashing across his gaunt frame. For a heartbeat, the fog parted, and I saw not just him, but dozens of pale figures crowding the mist behind him, watching, waiting. Then the fog closed, and he was gone. The stranger's words clung to me like the fog itself. "Follow the riverbed. That's where they went." I didn't want to believe him, but when I turned back toward the square, the world seemed wrong. Buildings bent at odd angles, windows shifting like eyes. Even the ground looked less like dirt and more like flesh, puckered and uneven. I couldn't stay. I pushed forward, retracing my steps toward the dried riverbed I'd glimpsed earlier that afternoon. The fog was thicker now, rising to my chest, forcing me to sweep my light in frantic arcs just to stay oriented. Somewhere behind me, that scraping sound followed, patient, deliberate, as if it knew I couldn't outrun it. The riverbed appeared suddenly, the fog thinning just enough to reveal the cracked stones that marked its path. The silence was worse here, heavy and absolute, broken only by the crunch of my boots. For a while I thought the stranger had lied. The riverbed stretched on, lifeless, the canyon walls closing tighter as I went. Then I saw the opening. It was little more than a jagged slit in the rock face, barely wide enough for a man to slip through. Black as pitch, framed by roots that curled down like skeletal fingers. My beam faltered against the entrance, the darkness inside swallowing the light whole. Something about it felt wrong. Not just the cave, but the air itself. The smell hit me first. Wet soil, rot, and something metallic, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. I told myself I was a ranger. I'd crawled into caves before, mapped forgotten passages, navigated in worse conditions than this, but I'd never felt like the stone itself was breathing around me. I slid inside, my shoulders scraping against cold rock. The walls dripped with condensation, slick beneath my palms. The further I went, the quieter it became, until even the sound of my own footsteps seemed smothered. I kept waiting to hide. Earbats, water, anything that made sense. Instead, I heard voices. Faint at first, like echoes that didn't belong to me. "Daniel?" I froze. The beam of my flashlight trembled. That wasn't possible. No one here should have known my name. "Daniel." Louder now, curling through the stone. Male, female, young, old. It shifted with every repetition, as though the whole village spoke in unison. I gritted my teeth and kept moving, forcing myself deeper into the tunnel. The air grew hotter, heavy enough to sting my lungs. My vision swam. Then the tunnel widened. The chamber opened like a wound, vast and circular, the ceiling lost in darkness. Along the walls I saw carvings, the same runes etched into the church bell, but here they glowed faintly, pulsing with a sickly amber light. And at the center of the chamber lay a pit. It was perfectly round, its edges lined with more of those writhing roots. From within came the steady thrum of something alive, a pulse, deep and slow, like the beating of a colossal heart. The glow from the runes bled into it, illuminating shapes writhing just below the surface. Bodies. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Villagers, half submerged, their faces slack, eyes shut as if asleep. Their chests rose and fell in rhythm with the pulse, bound to it, sustained by it. My knees nearly gave. The whole village wasn't gone. They were here, alive. But something was keeping them that way. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body locked up as I stared at that pit, at the slow rise and fall of the villagers' chests. It was impossible. No food, no water, no warmth. Yet here they were, suspended in some obscene stasis, their mouths slightly open as if breathing with the rhythm of the pulse below. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of it, when one of them twitched, just a flicker, a hand jerking upward before settling again. My breath hitched. They weren't just alive, they were aware. The pulse throbbed louder, shaking the chamber. It rattled my teeth, buzzed through my skull. The flashlight dimmed as though something was feeding on its power. My chest tightened. I crouched low, gripping the slick stone to steady myself. "Daniel." The voices came again, spilling from the pit like vapor. My name echoing, stretching, layering on top of itself until it was all I could hear. The villagers' lips were moving, synchronized with the sound. Hundreds of voices chanting me. I stumbled backward, slamming into the cavern wall. The carvings burned brighter where my shoulder hit, flaring like molten metal. For the first time, I noticed the grooves weren't simple etchings. They were channels, shallow veins carved into the rock, pulsing faintly as if carrying some fluid. That was when I realized the cave wasn't a natural chamber. It was built. And the pit, it wasn't a hole. It was a mouth. I forced myself closer, against every screaming instinct. My ranger training meant I looked for evidence, for proof, even when terror begged me to run. I peered down into the shifting shapes beneath the surface. The water, or whatever that black liquid was, wasn't water at all. It was viscous, alive, flowing like muscle fiber, twitching with each beat. Something stirred beneath. The liquid rippled outward, and for the briefest instant, I saw a shape pressing up against the surface. And a vast eye, lidless, pale, and impossibly large, staring directly at me. The pulse skipped. The chamber groaned. My legs nearly buckled, but I turned and scrambled toward the tunnel. The voices rose behind me, louder now, desperate, pleading. "Stay, Daniel, stay!" The air thickened as I climbed, the tunnel seeming narrower than before. The walls flexed against me, slick and warm, like moving through the throat of some enormous animal. My flashlight sputtered, the beam jerking wildly as if struggling to keep its focus. Something followed. I didn't hear footsteps, not exactly, but a shifting, a pulling from behind as though the pit itself was dragging its mass toward me. I shoved harder, scraping skin from my palms on jagged stone, gasping as the opening finally appeared ahead. The night fog poured in, ghostly and cold against my burning face. I collapsed onto the dry riverbed, gulping air, the flashlight rolling from my grip. Behind me, the cave shuddered once, twice, then fell silent. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it all, that I'd fallen into some fever dream, but when I looked down at my hands, I saw the truth. Fine black veins threaded beneath my skin, pulsing in time with the heartbeat I'd left behind. The veins didn't fade. I sat in the dirt, staring at my hands, flexing my fingers as if movement would erase the black lines. But the more I flexed, the deeper they seemed to root beneath my skin, winding upward toward my wrist. They pulsed faintly, not in time with my heartbeat, but with something else, something slower, something alien. I pulled my sleeve down, trying to cover it, though I knew how useless that was. My stomach churned as if I'd swallowed a mouthful of the cavern's stagnant air. Nausea rose sharp and bitter, but I forced it back. I couldn't afford weakness now. The village was still silent behind me, too silent. No nightbirds, no crickets, just fog curling thick around the ruined houses. I pushed myself up and staggered toward the checkpoint. If anyone could help, if anyone should be told, it was base command. I needed a radio. I needed backup. But with every step, I felt it, that presence, the faint tug deep in my chest, like a string tethering me to the cavern. It wasn't just under my skin. It was inside me, whispering with each pulse. By the time I reached the checkpoint, my knees threatened to give out. I shoved the door open, flicking on the overhead light. Its weak glow filled the cramped room, the desk, the half-empty thermos, the radio. I grabbed the receiver, thumb hovering over the button. Then I froze. The static wasn't right. It wasn't random crackle. It was rhythm. A low throb echoing the same pulse I'd heard underground. When I pressed the button, the static stopped completely. No feedback. No hiss. Just silence. Daniel. The voice slithered from the speaker, smooth and wet, like sound carried through water. I dropped the receiver as though it had burned me. It swung, knocking against the desk. I staggered back. The light overhead flickered, casting sharp shadows across the walls. For a moment, it wasn't the checkpoint I saw. It was the cavern again, the pit, the villagers breathing in unison, their eyes opening in the dark. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering, "Not real, not real." But when I opened them, something else was wrong. The thermos on the desk was trembling. At first I thought it was just me, my shaking legs rattling the table. Then the lid popped loose. Black liquid spilled across the wood, thick and tar-like. It slithered rather than dripped, spreading outward in twisting lines. The smell hit me, metallic, sour, like blood left too long in the sun. My stomach lurched. I snatched the flashlight and bolted from the checkpoint, not even daring to look back. My boots pounded against the dirt, the fog closing in thicker than before. I didn't know where I was running. The village? The trail? Anywhere away from that room, from that voice. But no matter how far I went, the pull didn't ease. It dragged at my chest, heavy and insistent, as though the thing beneath had already claimed me. And the worst part? A small, traitorous whisper inside me didn't want to fight it. Sleep was impossible. I tried. God knows I tried. I lay on the cot in the checkpoint, boots still on, flashlight clutched in one hand like a weapon. The lamp above buzzed and flickered, stuttering shadows across the plywood walls. Every time my eyelids slipped shut, I saw them, the villagers, standing shoulder to shoulder, eyes glowing faint in the dark. Their mouths didn't move, but I could hear them chanting, the words pressing against my skull like a migraine. And underneath it all, that pulse, that damn pulse. It throbbed in my arms, my chest, my head, until I couldn't tell if it was coming from inside me or the earth itself. I sat up, drenched in sweat. The clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. The radio remained silent, the receiver hanging limp. The black veins crawling up my arm had spread further in the hours since I first noticed them. They reached my elbow now, branching like roots. I thought about cutting them out, just grabbing my knife and digging until I was clean again. But even imagining the blade sliding into flesh made the pulse quicken, as if the thing inside me knew, as if it was warning me. I stood and paced the small room. My body ached, bones heavy, skin clammy. The smell of the spilled black liquid still clung in the air, metallic and sweet, making me gag every time I breathed too deep. Then faintly, I heard it. A knock. 3 soft taps against the window. I froze, flashlight beam jerking toward the glass. Nothing but fog. Nothing but my own pale reflection staring back at me. I stepped closer, pressing the light right against the pane. That's when I saw it. A handprint, fresh, pressed against the outside of the glass, too large, too long-fingered to be human. The imprint oozed, black fluid dripping down the pane like ink in water. My breath caught. The knock came again, this time from the door, slow, deliberate. I raised the flashlight. Backing away, but my legs trembled. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted me. "Daniel." The voice was soft, muffled, but unmistakable. The same one from the radio. I spun, heart slamming against my ribs. The door handle twitched, turned. I ran, out the back, into the fog, boots sinking into wet earth. My flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the mist, but every tree looked the same. Every path wound back on itself. And then, movement. Shapes flickered in the fog, tall, thin figures shifting at the edges of the light. Their footsteps made no sound, yet I could feel them circling, tightening. I stumbled forward, lungs burning. The forest pressed closer, branches clawing at my clothes. My vision blurred, whether from exhaustion or infection I couldn't tell. But through the haze, one thing became clear. I wasn't running from them anymore. I was running toward them. The trees dissolved into a blur as the fog thickened, swallowing the beam of my flashlight until it barely reached past my boots. Every breath scraped my throat like cold ash, and my chest heaved with panic. Yet the pulse in my veins urged me forward, guiding me deeper into the woods I thought I knew better than anyone. Shapes moved just beyond sight. Not animals, not people. Too tall, too thin. They drifted between the trees like shadows shaken loose from bodies that no longer existed. I tried to convince myself they weren't real, that exhaustion was twisting the fog into phantoms. But the wet sound of their footsteps, the way branches bent under invisible weight, those were real. Daniel. My name rippled through the mist. Not shouted, but breathed. Dozens of voices overlapping, weaving together. It felt intimate, like something whispered in bed. It made my skin crawl. I stumbled into a clearing. My light caught the remnants of a campfire. Ashes scattered, ring of stones still warm. For a second, relief swelled in my chest. Someone else had been here. Maybe survivors. Maybe another ranger. But when I crouched closer, I saw the ash wasn't wood. It was clothing. Piles of shirts, pants, and shoes burned down to greasy dust. I recognized a patch sewn into one shredded sleeve, an emblem of the missing village. The shadows drew closer, forming a ring around the clearing. I couldn't see their faces, only the suggestion of movement, but I felt their attention, sharp and heavy as a blade pressed against my neck. I raised my flashlight higher, hand trembling. The beam slid across the fog and finally caught on something solid. A face. It hovered inches from me, pale and stretched too thin across bone. Eyes black as tar, wide and unblinking. Its lips parted, but no breath came out. Instead, black liquid dribbled down its chin, sizzling where it struck the dirt. I staggered, back, choking on bile. The face melted into the mist, but more emerged. Dozens, villagers, every last one of them. I recognized their features, faces I'd seen on missing posters, laughing in old photographs, all of them warped, hollow, dripping with that same corrosive fluid. "Help us," they whispered together. The sound almost broke me. It wasn't threatening, it was pleading. But beneath the words lurked hunger, a gnawing emptiness pulling me toward them. The pulse in my arm surged, veins glowing faintly through the skin. My body moved on its own, stepping closer to the circle. I fought it, digging my nails into my palm until blood ran. "No," I croaked, voice ragged. "You're not real. You're not." But they were. One reached forward, fingers like branches, black nails dripping. It brushed against my shoulder, and the pulse erupted through me like fire. My knees buckled. For a moment, the world blurred, and I saw it. A void stretching beneath the earth, endless, waiting. And inside it, something vast and patient turned its gaze toward me. When my vision snapped back, the circle was gone. The clearing was empty, but the warmth of that touch remained, burning into my flesh. Morning light never came. Instead, the fog thinned just enough to reveal the forest in muted gray, as if the sun had been smothered. I sat hunched by the remains of the clearing, staring at my shoulder where the thing had touched me. The skin wasn't normal anymore. Veins bulged beneath it, pulsing faintly with a sickly glow, like embers trapped under flesh. When I pressed my fingers against it, the heat burned. Not from outside, but from within, as though something alive was writhing beneath the surface. I wanted to believe it was a hallucination, some trick of exhaustion and fear. But then the mark throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I realized it wasn't a wound. It was a connection, a tether. I stumbled to my feet, bile rising. The fog shifted, carrying with it a low hum that seemed to come from every direction. The same frequency I'd felt in the abandoned houses, vibrating through wood and stone. Now it pulsed in my bones. "Daniel," the voice again. Many voices. Not outside this time, but inside my skull. Whispering, coaxing. "Join us. You've already begun." I lurched forward, gripping my radio like a lifeline. The damn thing was dead, static in silence. I smacked it against my thigh, desperate for a crackle of human sound. Nothing. Just me and the fog. The forest path felt wrong. I'd walked it hundreds of times, patrolled it in every season. But now the landmarks shifted. Trees leaned in new directions. Boulders vanished. Streams cut across trails that shouldn't exist. I kept walking anyway, knowing if I stopped, the whispers would win. Hours bled together. My canteen was nearly empty when I spotted movement through the mist. Structures. Not the village, but something smaller. A cabin. Weathered wood, slanted roof, smoke curling faintly from a stone chimney. For the first time in days, I felt hope. A human presence. Maybe another ranger's shelter. Maybe a hunter. Anything was better than the emptiness. I approached cautiously, hand on the grip of my sidearm. The door creaked open before I touched it. Inside sat a man, older, gaunt, beard hanging in tangled strands. His eyes darted to me, wide and bloodshot. He clutched a hunting knife against his chest as if it were a crucifix. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped. Relief and dread crashed through me at once. A living soul, but one who looked like he'd been hollowed out by fear. "I'm Ranger Daniel Holt," I said, voice hoarse. "The village, Graybrook. It's gone. Do you know what happened?" His knife trembled in his grip. "Gone? No, not gone. Taken, same as the others." I stepped closer, heart hammering. "The others?" He jabbed the knife toward my shoulder. "It touched you, didn't it? I can see it in your skin." I froze. The mark pulsed hot, exposed. "You're already theirs," he hissed. "That mark means you belong to the Hollow now." The name lingered in the air, heavy as stone. And as he spoke it, the mark on my shoulder flared so violently I dropped to my knees, teeth grinding from the pain. The Hollow had heard, and it was listening. The cabin was suffocating. The old man's presence filled the space as much as the rot in the floorboards and the sour stench of unwashed clothes. His hands shook as he kept the knife pressed against his chest, but his eyes, wild, frantic, never left me. "You've got no time," he muttered, pacing. "No time at all. Once it marks you, the Hollow starts pulling. You'll hear it. In your bones, in your sleep. Then you're gone. I swallowed, throat raw. What is it? A disease? A cult? What are you talking about? He spun on me, hair falling into his eyes. Not a disease. Not human. It's older than the woods, the village. Greybrook didn't vanish. It was swallowed whole. That's what the Hollow does. It takes people, places, even the ground under your feet, and folds them into itself, like a snake unhinging its jaw. My shoulder pulsed again, as though in response to his words. I clenched my teeth, trying to ignore the burn. He noticed. His lips curled. You feel it, don't you? The tug. That's how it starts. First, the heat. Then, the voices. Then, nothing left but a hollowed shell walking until it vanishes into the fog. I thought of the empty homes, the meals still on tables, the doors flung wide. You've seen it happen? He gave a hollow laugh, bitter as ash. Seen? I lived there. Greybrook was my home, my wife, my boy. His voice cracked, knife lowering. They were taken the night the fog came. I ran. Coward, maybe, but running is the only reason I'm breathing. His eyes, rimmed red, found mine again. That mark means you won't get that chance. Anger flared through my fear. I'm not giving up. There has to be a way to stop it. He shook his head violently. You can't stop it. The Hollow doesn't die. It feeds. Best you can do is put a bullet in your brain before it drags you down. The weight of my sidearm at my hip felt heavier than ever. I thought of the service. Revolver, its simple certainty, and for the first time the idea of using it on myself flickered like a match in the dark, but I pushed it away. There has to be more. Something you're not saying. The old man's knife clattered to the floor. He pressed both palms to his head, rocking back and forth. The chapel, he whispered. Always the chapel. That's where it starts, where the voices gather. The bell stopped ringing, and then the fog rolled in. You'll find what you're looking for there, if it doesn't find you first. The cabin groaned as if in agreement. I stiffened, listening. The sound wasn't wood settling. It was footsteps circling outside, heavy, deliberate. The old man froze. His lips moved without sound, as though praying. The mark on my shoulder burned so hot I thought it might split open. And then, from outside, came a whisper carried through the fog. My own name. Daniel. The old man's cabin was shrinking around me. His warning still echoed. The chapel, that's where it begins. But the voice outside had rooted itself deeper in my skull. Hearing my name whispered in the fog was like being called by something that knew me better than I knew myself. The old man refused to move, crouched in the corner like a beaten dog. His knife lay forgotten on the floor. When I asked if he'd come with me, he just shook his head, muttering, "The chapel is death." So I left him behind. The fog pressed in as I stepped outside, thicker than before, carrying the sour, sweet smell of rot. My flashlight beam cut only a few feet ahead, swallowed almost instantly. Every sound was magnified, the crunch of gravel, the rasp of my own breath, and beneath it all, something else. Not footsteps this time, more like a slow dragging, as though something heavy was being pulled along the ground. I didn't dare look back. Greybrook's chapel sat at the far end of the village, its steeple barely visible through the haze. As I moved closer, the details emerged. The wood blackened, charred as if burned from the inside out. The bell tower leaned, its ropes dangling like snapped veins. The doors were flung wide, their hinges warped. My shoulder pulsed harder, each throb syncing with my heartbeat. It wasn't pain anymore. It was pressure, as though something inside was straining to push through. My shirt stuck to my skin with sweat. Crossing the threshold felt wrong, like stepping into a throat. The air inside was stifling, hot and wet, carrying a copper tang of blood. My flashlight beam revealed rows of pews warped and splintered, hymnals scattered and half-melted. The crucifix at the front twisted into something unrecognizable. The face was gone from Christ, replaced by a blank void. And then, faint at first, I heard it. Whispers. Dozens of them, layered and overlapping. Two. Low to make out words, but their rhythm was unmistakable. Chanting. It rose and fell like breath. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my other hand hovering near my revolver. "Who's there?" My voice cracked in the silence. The whispers stopped. Then, all at once, the pews shuddered as though something had brushed against them. The floorboards beneath my boots quivered. I swung the light around wildly, and that's when I saw them. Shadows. Not cast by anything, not belonging to anything. Just shapes, stretched long across the walls, writhing as if alive. My name slithered out again. Daniel. This time it came from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor itself. My shoulder erupted in white-hot pain. I ripped my shirt down to see it. The mark had changed. No longer a simple burn, it had spread, jagged lines branching out like roots, pulsing faintly as though alive. The shadows bent toward me, converging, reaching, and then, with a sound like a throat clearing after centuries of silence, the bell above tolled. Once, deep, final. The floor split beneath my feet. I fell into darkness. The fall wasn't long, but it felt endless, like I'd been swallowed. My body hit damp earth with a thud that knocked the air out of my lungs. For a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing, echoing in the dark. My flashlight, miraculously unbroken, lay a few feet away, casting a thin beam against the wall. I grabbed it with shaking hands and swung the light around. I was underground. The air was thick and humid, carrying the stink of mildew, copper, and something far fouler. Decay. The chamber stretched wide, the walls carved roughly from earth and stone. Jagged roots hung down like blackened veins, some pulsing faintly, twitching as if alive. And beneath them were shapes, dozens of them. At first I thought they were people crouched in prayer, but as the light steadied, the truth sank in. They weren't alive. The villagers, men, women, even children, were fused into the very walls. Their bodies were half consumed by the earth, faces slack, eyes hollow sockets, skin stretched taut, like something had sucked them dry. Their mouths hung open, and from those mouths came the whispering. It wasn't speech, it was a current, a vibration, the sound of air moving through hollow things. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. I staggered back, my shoulder screaming in protest. The mark burned brighter now, each pulse syncing with the whispers. Then something stirred deeper in the cavern. I swung the light forward. The floor dipped into a pit at the center, blacker than black. My beam couldn't pierce it, but I felt it, pressure rising, like standing at the edge of a storm. And then I saw movement. Something vast shifted in the darkness below. A ripple, like the surface of water, but thicker, heavier. The villagers' whispers swelled, frantic, their slack mouths straining wider, though their eyes remained dead. The ground trembled. Daniel. The voice roll. Lead up from the pit, deeper now, guttural like stone grinding on stone. My knees buckled under the weight of it. The mark on my shoulder blazed white-hot. I ripped at my skin in desperation, but it was no longer just a burn. It was burrowing, feeding, rooting itself inside me. The thing in the pit moved again. I glimpsed a shape, long, serpentine, skin the color of ash, slick and veined. It rose only for a moment before slipping back into the dark, but its size was impossible. It wasn't a creature. It was a landscape of flesh. The whispers reached a crescendo. My flashlight flickered, and every villager's head turned toward me at once. Their mouths moved in unison, forcing sound into a single, awful command. Join. I staggered backward, tripping over a root. My revolver slipped free from its holster. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. The pit shuddered again, rising higher. Something massive was coming. The mark on my shoulder split, blood running hot down my arm. I realized, with a clarity that froze me to the core, that the hollow wasn't under the village. The hollow was the village. The cavern pulsed like a living organ, every wall trembling with a rhythm I could feel in my teeth. My light jittered across the fused bodies, their eyes empty yet fixed on me. Their mouths hung open in silent unity now, as though they were holding their breath, waiting. The pit in the center began to stir, not like water, not like earth. It writhed. The blackness swelled upward, and a shape pushed through, impossibly vast. The first thing I saw were the eyes. Dozens of them scattered across its body, blinking out of sync. Each iris was too human, brown, green, hazel, like they had been stolen. Some were bloodshot, others clouded white. They focused on me, narrowing in recognition, though none belonged to me. The body that followed was worse. Veins as thick as branches pulsed beneath its gray flesh. Segments of what might have once been people shifted inside it, their faces stretched across its surface like pressed flowers. Hands clawed weakly from its skin before being reabsorbed. The thing wasn't a monster, it was a collection, a harvest, and it wanted me. The mark on my shoulder throbbed in sync with its heartbeat, pulling me toward the pit. My knees bent unwillingly. It was inside me now, tugging at my muscles. My revolver felt like lead in my hand. I tried to raise it, but my own arm resisted. "Daniel." The voice thundered again, but it was clearer now. It wasn't one voice. It was hundreds layered together, men, women, children, a chorus. "You were called." My stomach twisted. I wasn't just marked, I'd been chosen. The checkpoint hadn't been random. The village hadn't vanished. They'd been consumed piece by this thing, until they were part of it, and now it was reaching for me. I forced my arm upward, revolver shaking. The voices surged into my skull, filling it with a single word that scraped against my bones. "Join." The barrel pressed against, but my temple before I realized what I was doing. My hand wasn't my own anymore. I screamed, straining, veins bulging as I fought to lower the gun. The thing laughed. Or maybe the cavern did. The sound rattled my ribs. With a final burst of will, I tore the weapon free and fired into the pit. The shot cracked like thunder. The cavern screamed. Not the villagers, not the whispers. The hollow itself. The blast echoed, shaking dirt loose from the ceiling. The bodies in the walls convulsed, their mouths stretched wide in silent agony. The pit recoiled, its flesh rippling, eyes blinking shut. But it didn't die. Instead, it surged upward, faster, angrier, like I'd only wounded it. Roots tore free, writhing like snakes, lashing toward me. I scrambled back, flashlight jerking wildly. One root slashed across my chest, burning through cloth and skin. I howled. The revolver clicked empty. The hollow rose higher, filling the chamber, and I realized the awful truth. What I'd faced so far wasn't its true form. It was just the beginning of its awakening. The cavern shook like the belly of a storm, and the hollow surged toward me, an avalanche of flesh, eyes, and stolen voices. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into a darkness that felt alive. Only the faint red glow from the pit lit the chamber, bathing everything in a hellish haze. The voices pressed into my skull, 1,000 whispering tongues clawing for dominance. "Join. Join. You were chosen." The word dripped like poison, seeping into every nerve. My knees buckled. My chest burned where the root had struck me, and I tasted iron in my mouth. I staggered back, searching desperately. My revolver was empty. The knife at my belt felt laughable against something so immense. Then my hand brushed the flare strapped to my vest, a ranger's last resort tool, meant for rescue signals, not survival. But fire was fire. I yanked it free, thumb shaking on the cap. The hollow paused, dozens of eyes blinking in unison. It recognized what I held. The whispers sharpened, turning from seduction to fury. No. The bodies fused to the walls screamed without sound, faces stretching, trying to tear free. The cavern itself seemed to resist me, air growing thick as tar. My lungs screamed for oxygen. My hand trembled. I thought of my father, the man who had taught me to track, to survive. I thought of the families who had lived in this village, reduced now to flesh wallpaper. And I thought of the checkpoint, the empty silence, the unanswered radios. I struck the flare. A searing red light erupted, hissing, spitting sparks. The hollow shrieked, a sound so powerful it cracked the stone above. Roots thrashed wildly, smashing against the walls. Dust rained down like ash. I held the flare high, its smoke curling around me, and hurled myself toward the pit. The heat scorched my face as I drove the flare deep into the writhing mass. Flesh sizzled, popped, releasing a stench worse to rotting meat. The hollow convulsed, slamming me back against the cavern wall. My bones rattled, but I didn't let go. I pushed harder, plunging the burning light deeper. The voices inside my head erupted in screams. Not words anymore, just agony. Faces bubbled on the hollow skin, contorting, shriveling, then collapsing into nothing. The cavern began to collapse. Cracks split the floor, a deafening roar filled the air, and I realized the hollow wasn't dying quietly, it was taking everything with it. With my last ounce of strength, I tore free, stumbling toward the tunnel. Stone rained from the ceiling. Roots lashed blindly, smashing into walls, shattering stalactites. I sprinted through the collapsing chamber, the screams chasing me like fire. I burst into the night air just as the ground heaved. The earth behind me split open, swallowing the village whole. A plume of dust and flame shot skyward, then silence. I collapsed in the dirt, chest heaving, blood soaking my uniform. The mark on my shoulder still burned faintly, but the whispers were gone. The hollow had been wounded, buried maybe, but not destroyed. Somewhere beneath the earth, it still breathed. And I knew this wasn't the end, just the reprieve before it rose again.